The morning started like any other at Kensington Palace. Birds chirped in the gardens, and the early sunlight painted the old stone walls in shades of gold. Inside, Princess Charlotte was getting ready for her riding lesson. The young princess loved horses more than anything else in the world. She had been looking forward to this day all week because her favorite mare, Buttercup, had just returned from the countryside. Charlotte's personal protection officer, James Mitchell, stood outside her room. He was a tall man with kind eyes and had been protecting the royal children for 5 years. James took his job seriously, but always made sure the children felt safe and happy, not scared or restricted. He checked his watch and smiled. Charlotte was usually right on time, eager and excited for her riding sessions. Down the hallway, Catherine was reviewing the day's schedule with her assistant. The morning seemed peaceful and organized. Everything was planned down to the minute, as royal life often required. Charlotte would have her riding lesson, followed by lunch, and then some quiet study time in the afternoon. It was a normal Tuesday, or so everyone thought. Meanwhile, across London, a group of 5 motorcyclists gathered at a cafe near Hyde Park. They were dressed in black leather jackets and wore dark helmets that covered their faces completely. The leader, a man named Derek, received a text message on his phone. He read it twice, then showed it to the others. The message contained an address and simple instructions that made them all exchange nervous glances. They had been paid well for this job, though none of them knew exactly who was behind it or why. The motorcycles roared to life one by one. The sound echoed through the quiet morning streets as they began their journey toward Kensington. People on the sidewalks turned to look at the intimidating group speeding past. The riders moved in formation, weaving through traffic with practiced ease. They had done jobs like this before, though usually for debt collectors or people involved in shady business deals. This time felt different. The address they were heading to was in one of the most exclusive areas of London. Back at the palace, Charlotte emerged from her room wearing her riding boots and jacket. Her face lit up with excitement as she talked to James about Buttercup. James listened patiently, nodding and asking questions about the horse. He had 2 daughters of his own and understood how important these simple joys were for children, even royal ones. As they walked through the corridors toward the exit that led to the stables, James felt his phone vibrate. It was a message from the security control room. The message was brief, but concerning. Unidentified motorcycles approaching the palace grounds. James immediately shifted into professional mode. He gently placed a hand on Charlotte's shoulder and told her they needed to wait inside for just a moment. Charlotte looked confused, but trusted James completely. He spoke into his radio, connecting with the other security personnel stationed around the property. The head of security, Commander Richard Thompson, was already mobilizing his team. Richard had served in the military for 20 years before joining the Royal Protection Unit. He had seen action in difficult places and knew how to assess threats quickly. The cameras positioned around the palace perimeter showed the 5 motorcycles slowing down as they approached the main gates. They were not trying to force their way in, but their presence was clearly intended to be noticed. Richard watched the monitors carefully. The riders seemed to be circling the area, revving their engines loudly. It was an intimidation tactic, he realized. But who were they trying to intimidate? And more importantly, who had sent them? Royal properties occasionally dealt with protesters or overzealous fans, but this felt organized and deliberate. The timing also troubled him. They had arrived just as Princess Charlotte was scheduled to leave for her riding lesson inside the palace. Catherine heard the commotion and immediately asked what was happening. When she learned about the motorcycles outside, her maternal instincts kicked in instantly. She rushed to where Charlotte was waiting with James. The young princess could sense something was wrong from the serious expressions around her. Catherine hugged her daughter and assured her everything was fine. Though her own heart was racing with concern, the motorcycles continued their display outside the gates for several minutes. Palace guards stood ready, positioned strategically, but not aggressively. They were trained to handle situations without escalating them unnecessarily. Richard made quick calls to local police and other security coordinators. Within minutes, police units were dispatched to the area. The riders seemed to know their time was limited. as sirens became audible in the distance. They regrouped and prepared to leave. But before they left, Derek, the leader, pulled out his phone and made a call. He spoke briefly to someone, confirming that the message had been delivered. The person on the other end seemed satisfied. Derek and his crew then accelerated away from the palace, disappearing into the London traffic before police could surround the area. The entire incident lasted less than 15 minutes, but it left everyone at Kensington Palace shaken and full of questions. Richard immediately launched an investigation. He reviewed all camera footage and began the process of trying to identify the motorcycles and their riders. The license plates had been obscured, which suggested planning and intent to avoid identification. He also started thinking about who might have wanted to send such a message to the palace. Royal security dealt with various threats regularly, but this felt personal somehow. Catherine held Charlotte close, trying to decide what to tell her daughter. The riding lesson was obviously canceled for the day. Charlotte was disappointed, but could see how worried everyone looked. She asked her mother if they were in danger. Catherine chose her words carefully, explaining that sometimes people do silly things to get attention, but that they were always safe and protected. Charlotte seemed to accept this explanation, though she kept glancing toward the windows. James felt frustrated. His job was to prevent exactly this kind of situation from affecting the children. Even though no one had been hurt and the motorcycles never breached the palace grounds, the psychological impact was real. Charlotte's routine had been disrupted, and her sense of safety had been questioned. He made a mental note to increase his vigilance and coordinate more closely with the broader security team. As the morning progressed, news of the incident remained contained within palace walls. Richard wanted to understand what happened before any information leaked to the press. He knew that media attention could complicate the investigation and potentially put the royal family at greater risk. His team worked efficiently, contacting various intelligence sources and checking recent security briefings for any warnings they might have missed in a different part of London. Derek and his crew returned to their usual hangout. They were quiet, each processing what they had just done. The money had been good, better than most jobs they took. But something about intimidating a location where children lived did not sit well with some of them. Derek noticed the mood and reminded everyone that they had simply ridden their motorcycles near a public street. They had not broken any laws technically, though they all knew the intent behind their presence. The person who had hired them remained anonymous. The arrangement had been made through encrypted messages and cryptocurrency payments. Derek had learned long ago not to ask too many questions in his line of work. Curiosity could be dangerous and bad for business. But even he wondered what kind of person would target a place where royal children lived. It took a special kind of coldness to involve kids in adult conflicts. Back at Kensington, William was informed of the incident while he was attending an official engagement across town. He cut his appearance short and immediately returned home. When he arrived, he found Catherine and the children in the private sitting room. Charlotte was drawing pictures, trying to act normal, but he could see the tension in her small shoulders. He sat down with his family and listened as Richard briefed him on everything they knew so far. William's jaw tightened as he heard the details. Someone had deliberately tried to frighten his daughter. The protective father in him wanted immediate action and answers. The future king in him knew this needed to be handled carefully and strategically. He thanked Richard for his quick response and asked him to pursue every possible lead. He also requested that security around all the children be enhanced immediately, at least until they understood the nature and source of this threat. The rest of the day passed in an atmosphere of heightened awareness. Staff members whispered in corners, speculation mixing with genuine concern. Charlotte eventually asked if she could still have her riding lesson tomorrow. William and Catherine exchanged glances before William knelt down to his daughter's level. He promised her that Buttercup would be waiting for her very soon, and that nothing and no one would stop her from doing the things she loved. Charlotte smiled, reassured by her father's confidence. As evening approached and the palace settled into its nighttime routines, Richard sat in his office reviewing footage for the 100th time. There had to be something they were missing. Some clue about who these riders were and who had sent them. His phone rang. It was a contact from intelligence services who had heard about the incident through official channels. The conversation was brief, but added a new dimension to the investigation. According to the intelligence contact, there had been unusual activity on certain encrypted communication channels, used by people who offered intimidation services for hire. The timing matched perfectly with the motorcycle incident. This confirmed what Richard already suspected. This was not random. Someone with resources and connections had orchestrated this deliberately. The question that kept everyone awake that night was simple but chilling. Who would want to intimidate Princess Charlotte, and why? The next morning brought no easy answers. Richard Thompson gathered his entire security team for an emergency briefing. Maps of the palace grounds covered one wall, and screens displayed frozen images of the motorcycles from various camera angles. Every person in that room understood the gravity of what had happened. Someone had managed to coordinate an intimidation attempt against a member of the royal family, and they had done it without leaving obvious traces. Sarah Chen, the team's digital forensics expert, presented her findings first. She had spent the entire night analyzing metadata from security cameras and cross-referencing with traffic cameras throughout London. The motorcycles had appeared on exactly 3 different cameras before reaching Kensington. After leaving, they had split up and taken routes that avoided most surveillance. This level of planning suggested professional coordination, or at least someone with knowledge of London's security infrastructure. Richard listened carefully as each team member shared their analysis. The conclusion was troubling. This was not the work of random troublemakers or attention-seeking individuals. Someone had invested time, money, and planning into sending a very specific message. The question everyone kept returning to was who had the motivation and resources to do such a thing. Royal family dynamics were complicated, Richard knew. Years of working in this environment had taught him that palace politics could be as dangerous as external threats. Meanwhile, Catherine was having breakfast with Charlotte and trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. The young princess had asked again about her riding lesson. Catherine had promised her that today they would definitely go to the stables, surrounded by extra security if needed. She refused to let fear dictate their lives or rob Charlotte of her childhood joys. As they ate, Catherine's mind kept returning to the incident. Who could hate a child so much? What had Charlotte done to deserve being frightened in her own home? William had left early for meetings but called every hour to check on his family. His staff noticed he was more distracted than usual, his mind clearly elsewhere. During a break between meetings, he stepped outside and called Richard directly. William wanted to know if there were any updates, any leads at all. Richard had to admit they were still piecing things together, but he assured William that every resource was being utilized. Across London, in an elegant townhouse in Belgravia, Camilla was having tea with one of her longtime confidants, a woman named Patricia who had known her for decades. They sat in a sun-filled room decorated with expensive antiques and fresh flowers. The conversation seemed casual, touching on charity events and social calendars, but Patricia noticed that Camilla seemed particularly satisfied about something. A subtle smugness in her expression that Patricia had learned to recognize over the years. Patricia did not ask directly. She had learned that Camilla shared information in her own time and her own way. Instead, she commented on how stressful royal life must be, especially with so many strong personalities in one family. Camilla's smile widened slightly. She mentioned, almost casually, that sometimes people needed reminders about their place in the hierarchy. Young people especially could benefit from understanding that actions had consequences. Patricia sipped her tea and said nothing, but she filed away the comment in her mind. Back at Kensington Palace, James Mitchell accompanied Charlotte to the stables for her rescheduled riding lesson. For additional security personnel positioned themselves around the area, trying to be discreet but obviously present. Charlotte noticed them, but said nothing. She was a smart girl and understood more than adults sometimes gave her credit for. Buttercup greeted her with familiar affection, and for an hour, Charlotte lost herself in the joy of riding. James watched her smile return and felt some of the tension leave his own shoulders. Richard received a call from his intelligence contact again. There had been developments. Digital forensics teams had managed to trace some of the cryptocurrency transactions used to pay the motorcycle crew. The trail led through several shell companies and foreign accounts. making it nearly impossible to identify the original source. However, they had discovered something interesting. The encrypted communication platform used to hire the riders had been accessed from an IP address in central London. More specifically, from an area where several royal residences and aristocratic homes were located. This information changed everything. Richard immediately understood the implications. If the person behind this lived in or had access to locations in that area, it suggested someone within or very close to royal circles. He called an immediate meeting with William and shared this development privately. William's face grew stern as he processed what this might mean. If someone in their own extended family or social circle was targeting Charlotte, it represented a betrayal that cut deeper than any external threat. Catherine was informed shortly after. Her initial reaction was disbelief. Who among the people they knew, the people they trusted, could do something so cruel? But as she thought about recent events and tensions within the family, uncomfortable possibilities began to form in her mind. There had been disagreements and conflicts, certainly. Royal families were not immune to jealousy, competition, and resentment. But to involve a child in such schemes seemed unthinkable. That evening, William and Catherine sat together after the children were asleep. They discussed possibilities they wished they did not have to consider. Recent months had seen various tensions within the broader royal family. There had been disagreements about public roles, media coverage, and hierarchy. Catherine had noticed certain coldness from some family members, particularly regarding how much attention Charlotte and her brothers received from the public and press. But could professional jealousy or wounded pride really motivate someone to frighten a child? William made a decision. He would speak directly with his father and explain the situation. If there was indeed an internal threat, it needed to be addressed immediately and decisively. The royal family had weathered many storms throughout history, but internal betrayal was often the most damaging. He scheduled a private meeting for the next morning, insisting it could not wait. His father's office, sensing the urgency, cleared the schedule without question. James Mitchell could not sleep that night. He kept replaying the incident in his mind, analyzing every detail. Something had been bothering him since it happened, a small detail he could not quite grasp. Then, around midnight, it clicked. The timing. The motorcycles had arrived exactly when Charlotte was scheduled to leave for her original riding lesson. That information was not public. It was not even widely known within palace staff. Only people with access to the royal family's private schedules would have known that specific timing. He immediately called Richard, not caring about the late hour. Richard answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the time. James shared his realization. Richard was quiet for a moment, then thanked James for the insight. After hanging up, Richard sat in the darkness of his bedroom, thinking, this changed the investigation significantly. They were not just looking for someone with resources and connections. They were looking for someone with inside access to royal schedules and movements. The circle of suspects had just become very small and very uncomfortable. The next morning, William met with his father at Clarence's house. The conversation was difficult and painful. William explained everything, laying out the facts and the emerging evidence. His father listened with growing concern and anger. The idea that someone close to the family could be involved was deeply troubling. He promised William that he would make discreet inquiries and use his own network to uncover the truth. They agreed that Catherine and the children's security needed to remain enhanced until this was resolved. After William left, his father sat alone in his study. Decades of navigating royal politics had taught him that family dynamics could be complicated and sometimes dark. He thought about various individuals who might have motivation. Jealousy over public affection toward William's children was real. Some family members felt overshadowed, their own contributions undervalued. But to act on such feelings in this way required a level of malice he hoped did not exist within his family. Catherine took Charlotte shopping that afternoon, determined to maintain routine and normalcy. They went to a small boutique that had been cleared in advance by security. Charlotte tried on dresses and laughed at her reflection. For a few hours, she was just a young girl, enjoying time with her mother. But Catherine noticed the security detail, larger than usual, always present in her peripheral vision. She smiled for Charlotte's sake, but felt the weight of constant vigilance. Meanwhile, Richard's team continued their investigation with renewed focus. They began carefully reviewing access logs for royal schedules. Who had viewed Charlotte's calendar in the days before the incident? The list was surprisingly short. Family members, private secretaries, security personnel, and a few trusted staff members. Each name represented someone who should be above suspicion, which made the task ahead even more delicate. They could not interview or investigate these people openly without causing alarm and potential scandal. Sarah Chen suggested a different approach. Rather than investigating people directly, they could trace the pattern of information flow. When was Charlotte's schedule finalized? Who communicated it, and to whom? Digital breadcrumbs might reveal how sensitive information reached someone willing to use it maliciously. It was painstaking work, requiring them to build timelines and map communications. But it was less likely to alert the person they were looking for. That evening, Patricia called Camilla. The conversation seemed innocent enough, discussing an upcoming charity gala. But Patricia, being a skilled observer of human nature, asked subtle questions. She mentioned hearing about some excitement at Kensington Palace, wondering if Camilla had heard anything. Camilla's response was careful but revealing. She said that sometimes young people needed to learn that life was not always smooth and protected. Patricia felt a chill, but kept her voice light and neutral. After the call ended, she sat thinking about her old friend and wondering if loyalty had limits. Charlotte had nightmares that night. Catherine heard her daughter crying out and rushed to her room. She held Charlotte as the girl described dreams of loud noises and scary men in black. Catherine's heart broke. Despite their best efforts to shield her, the incident had affected Charlotte more than she had admitted during the day. Catherine stayed with her daughter until she fell back asleep, then returned to her own room where William waited, looking equally troubled. They made a decision together. Whatever investigation was happening needed to conclude quickly. They could not allow their daughter to live in fear or under siege in her own home. William sent a message to Richard and to his father. They needed answers within days, not weeks. If that meant taking risks or making waves within the family, so be it. Charlotte's well-being took priority over everything else, including family harmony and public appearances. Richard received William's message at midnight. He understood the pressure and the timeline. Tomorrow, he would present his team's findings so far and they would decide on the next steps. The evidence was circumstantial but pointing in a direction none of them wanted to acknowledge. Someone with significant access and resources, someone connected to the family, was behind the intimidation attempt. Proving it conclusively would be challenging. But Richard had learned throughout his career that sometimes you had to trust your instincts and act decisively. As dawn broke over London, various pieces were moving into position. William's father had made his own discreet calls to trusted advisors within the family structure. Patricia had decided that her conscience required her to share her observations, despite the personal cost to her friendship. Richard's team had narrowed their investigation to 3 possible sources of the schedule leak. And somewhere in London, the person behind it all went about their day, confident that their message had been delivered and their tracks sufficiently covered. But confidence, Richard knew, often led to mistakes, and mistakes led to exposure. Patricia could not sleep. She kept replaying her conversation with Camilla in her mind, hearing the subtle satisfaction in her friend's voice when discussing Kensington Palace. After hours of internal debate, she made a decision that would change everything. At 7 in the morning, she called a number she had saved years ago, a direct line to someone in William's private office. She explained she had information that might be relevant to recent security concerns. Within an hour, she was being collected by a discreet security vehicle. Richard Thompson met Patricia in a private room at Kensington Palace. She was nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she accepted a cup of tea. Richard had interviewed countless people throughout his career and knew how to put someone at ease while getting to the truth. He assured Patricia that anything she shared would be handled with utmost discretion. Patricia took a deep breath and began recounting her conversations with Camilla. The subtle comments, the timing, the unusual satisfaction she had displayed. As Patricia spoke, Richard took careful notes. Nothing she said was direct evidence, but it aligned perfectly with what his investigation had begun to suggest. Camilla had the access, the resources, and potentially the motivation. Royal hierarchy and public perception were important to her. The overwhelming affection the public showed toward William's children, particularly Charlotte, might have felt like a threat or an insult. Richard thanked Patricia and assured her she had done the right thing by coming forward. William was informed immediately. The news hit him like a physical blow. His stepmother, targeting his daughter. The woman his father had married, someone who should be family, orchestrating an act of intimidation against a child. His hands shook with anger as he processed the information. Catherine, standing beside him, looked equally stunned. They had considered various possibilities, but this felt like a betrayal of the deepest kind. It was not just about Charlotte anymore. It was about trust, family, and the basic decency they had assumed existed within their circle. Richard advised caution. Patricia's testimony was valuable, but circumstantial. They needed concrete proof before making any accusations, especially against someone in Camilla's position. The consequences of being wrong would be catastrophic for family relationships and public perception. But the consequences of being right and not acting would mean leaving Charlotte vulnerable to someone willing to harm her. Richard proposed a plan. They would set a careful trap, one that would either clear Camilla completely or provide undeniable proof of her involvement. The plan was simple, but required perfect execution. They would create false information about Charlotte's schedule, something specific and tempting. Then they would carefully control who had access to this information, creating different versions for different people. If the motorcycle crew or similar threats appeared at the fake event, they would know exactly who had leaked the information. It was risky. If Camilla was innocent, they would be conducting surveillance on a senior member of the royal family based on suspicion alone. But William and Catherine agreed it was necessary. Sarah Chen was brought into the plan. She would create the digital trail, making it appear that Charlotte would be attending a private art class at a gallery in South Kensington on Thursday afternoon. The information would be added to the official schedule with strict access controls. Only 5 people would see the complete details. Each would receive a slightly different version with unique identifying markers. If the information leaked, those markers would reveal exactly who had shared it. Camilla received her version of Charlotte's schedule through the normal channels that senior royals used to stay informed about family activities. The schedule coordinator, not knowing about the investigation, sent it routinely. Camilla glanced at it while having breakfast, noting the art class on Thursday. She set down her tablet and sipped her coffee, her expression thoughtful. Patricia, who had been invited for breakfast, noticed the subtle change in Camilla's demeanor. There was calculation in her eyes, a look Patricia had seen before when Camilla was planning something. Thursday morning arrived with gray skies and light rain. At Kensington Palace, Charlotte was being told that her art class had been canceled due to the weather. She was disappointed but accepted the change without much fuss. She had no idea that she was never meant to attend that class, that it had been a fiction created to catch whoever was threatening her. Instead, she spent the morning with her brothers, playing games and drawing pictures under the watchful eyes of James and the dead security team. Richard had positioned surveillance around the South Kensington Gallery. Plainclothes officers blended into the street, watching for any signs of unusual activity. Security cameras had been accessed, and a command center monitored every angle. If anyone showed up to intimidate or threaten at this location, they would be identified and tracked immediately. William insisted on being at the command center, though Richard had advised against it. As a father, William needed to see this through personally. Around noon, reports started coming in. Motorcycles had been spotted heading toward South Kensington. Richard felt his pulse quicken. This was it. The trap was working. 3 motorcycles, riders in black, circling the area around the gallery. They were being more cautious this time, not getting as close or making as much noise, but their presence was unmistakable. Police units were ready, but held back. Richard wanted to see if the riders would make contact with anyone or lead them to whoever had hired them. One of the riders pulled into a side street and took out a phone. Surveillance cameras zoomed in, capturing the call. Sarah worked frantically to trace the number being dialed. It went through several relays, typical of someone trying to hide their identity. But her team had prepared for this. It set up monitoring on all relevant lines connected to their suspects. When the trace completed, Sarah went pale. She turned to Richard and showed him the screen. The call had gone to a number registered to one of Camilla's private staff members. William saw the information and stood up abruptly. His face was a mask of controlled fury. Richard put a hand on his arm, urging him to wait for all the facts. They needed to hear what was said on that call, needed to establish a clear chain of command. The recording came through moments later. The writer was confirming the target's location and asking for instructions. The voice on the other end, female and cool, told them the target had not arrived and likely would not. The operation was aborted. She instructed them to leave the area immediately. Police moved in, intercepting the motorcycles before they could scatter. The riders were detained for questioning. Meanwhile, Richard authorized a more direct approach to Camilla's staff member. The woman was contacted and asked to come in for a voluntary interview regarding a security matter. She agreed, seeming confused and cooperative. But when confronted with evidence of her phone being used to coordinate the motorcycle crew, her composure cracked. The staff member, a woman named Helen who had worked for Camilla for 8 years, initially denied everything. But faced with recordings and digital evidence, she began to break down. Helen explained that Camilla had been increasingly upset about the public's obsession with William's children. She felt that Charlotte was being groomed to overshadow other royals, that the attention was inappropriate and damaging to family balance. Camilla had confided these frustrations to Helen multiple times over the past months. Then, about 2 weeks ago, Camilla had asked Helen a hypothetical question. What would it take to remind people that young royals were not untouchable? Helen had initially thought it was just venting, but Camilla had pressed further. She had suggested that a small scare, nothing dangerous but something that would make security seem fallible, might be educational. Helen admitted that she had taken it upon herself to arrange the motorcycle incidents, believing she was acting in Camilla's interests even though Camilla had never explicitly ordered it. This was the gray area Richard had feared. Did Camilla directly order the intimidation, or had Helen misinterpreted venting as instructions? Helen insisted Camilla had never explicitly told her to hire the motorcycle crew. But she also maintained that Camilla's comments and suggestions had made it clear what was desired. It was plausible deniability, tactic Richard had seen used by powerful people who wanted outcomes without being directly connected to methods. William listened to Helen's interview through the audio feed. His anger was now mixed with disgust. Whether Camilla had given direct orders or simply created an environment where her staff felt authorized to threaten his daughter, the result was the same. Charlotte had been terrorized in her own home. The violation felt personal and unforgivable. He called his father immediately, requesting an emergency private meeting. This could not wait any longer. The meeting took place that evening at Clarence's house. William's father had already been briefed on the day's developments by Richard. He looked older somehow, the weight of the situation visible in his face. William presented everything, every piece of evidence, every connection. His father listened. In silence, his expression growing more pained with each revelation. When William finished, there was a long, heavy silence. William's father finally spoke. He said that he needed to speak with Camilla directly before any decisions were made. William objected strongly. What was there to discuss? At best, Camilla had created an environment that led to his daughter being threatened. At worst, she had orchestrated it directly. Either way, she was responsible. His father acknowledged this, but insisted that confronting Camilla personally was necessary. He needed to hear her explanation, needed to understand how this had happened. Camilla was summoned to Clarence's house that night. She arrived looking composed but wary. She had heard that Helen had been questioned and likely knew that her world was about to change dramatically. William's father met with her privately first. The conversation lasted over an hour, and voices could occasionally be heard raised in anger from behind the closed doors. When they finally emerged, Camilla's composure had cracked. She looked shaken and defeated. Second meeting included William and Richard. Camilla sat rigidly in her chair as accusations were laid out methodically. She denied ordering any threats explicitly, but admitted to expressing frustration about Charlotte's prominence. She claimed Helen had acted on her own initiative, misinterpreting private venting as instructions. Richard asked pointed questions about her schedule review, about specific conversations Helen had reported. Camilla's answers became less certain, more defensive. William finally spoke directly to Camilla. He described Charlotte's nightmares, the fear in his daughter's eyes when she heard motorcycles now. He explained how the security of his family had been compromised from the inside by someone they should have been able to trust. Camilla attempted to apologize, to explain that she had never intended real harm. William cut her off. Intent did not matter when the result was his child being terrorized. He made clear that this had irreparably damaged any relationship between their households. The immediate question became what to do next. Prosecuting Camilla, or even Helen, would create a public scandal that could damage the entire institution of the monarchy. But doing nothing meant accepting that senior royals could orchestrate intimidation without consequences. William's father suggested a compromise that satisfied no one, but might be the least destructive option. Camilla would step back from public duties temporarily, citing health concerns. Helen would be dismissed immediately and required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements. The motorcycle crew members would be charged with harassment, but the connection to Camilla would be kept out of official records. William hated every part of this solution. It felt like protecting the institution at Charlotte's expense. But Catherine, when consulted, took a pragmatic view. Public scandal would mean Charlotte's ordeal becoming tabloid fodder. Every detail would be analyzed and speculated about. Charlotte would be victimized again, this time by media attention. Perhaps quiet justice was better than public spectacle. Reluctantly, William agreed to the plan, but with conditions. Camilla would have no access to his family or information about them. She would be excluded from private family events. And if anything similar ever happened again, all agreements would be void. That night, Catherine sat with Charlotte as the girl slept. She stroked her daughter's hair and made a silent promise. Charlotte would never know the full truth of what had happened or who was behind it. She would grow up believing it was just random troublemakers, nothing more. The poison of knowing that family had targeted her would be kept from her. Catherine would carry that burden instead. It was what mothers did, shield their children from the worst of the world for as long as possible. Richard completed his official report, though the version that would be filed was carefully sanitized. The true details were preserved and encrypted, files accessible only to the highest levels of security and family leadership. He felt conflicted about the outcome. Justice had been served in some ways, but compromised in others. Helen faced consequences while Camilla largely escaped them. But Richard understood the impossible position everyone was in, sometimes protecting. The institution meant imperfect solutions to personal crimes. The motorcycle crew members, when prosecuted, told stories of being hired through anonymous channels for what they thought was a publicity stunt. They claimed ignorance of the target's identity and the true nature of their actions. Most received suspended sentences and community service. Derek, the leader, served 3 months in jail for harassment and reckless behavior. None of them ever publicly connected their actions to Camilla or anyone specific. The money trail had been too well hidden, and prosecutors chose not to pursue it aggressively. As the week ended, life at Kensington Palace began returning to something resembling normal. Charlotte's riding lessons resumed without incident. The enhanced security gradually relaxed to standard levels. Charlotte stopped having nightmares, or at least stopped telling her parents about them. The family closed ranks, protecting each other and trying to move forward. But trust, once broken, is difficult to fully repair. Every family gathering would now carry the weight of what had happened, the knowledge of what one of their own had been capable of doing. 3 months had passed since the incident. The English spring was in full bloom, transforming the palace gardens into a riot of colors. Charlotte was once again her cheerful self, looking forward to her 10th birthday celebration. The motorcycles and the fear they had brought seemed like a distant memory to her. She never asked about that strange day anymore. Her parents had kept their word to let her believe it was nothing more than troublemakers, who had been caught and punished. But for the adults who knew the truth, the passage of time had not erased the impact. William remained cordial, but distant with his father, their relationship strained by how the situation had been handled. He understood the reasoning behind the quiet resolution, but understanding did not mean acceptance. Every time he saw Charlotte laugh or play without worry, he felt grateful she had been spared the full truth. Yet he also felt the injustice of Camilla. Facing minimal consequences for what she had caused, Catherine had channeled her anger into action. She had worked closely with Richard and his team to completely overhaul security protocols around the children. No longer would schedule information be shared as freely, even with family members. New encryption methods protected digital communications. Background checks on staff were intensified and repeated regularly. She was determined that no one would ever again have the opportunity to use inside information to harm her children. James Mitchell had been promoted to head of the Children's Protection Detail. His quick thinking and dedication during the crisis had not gone unnoticed. He took his new responsibilities seriously, implementing training programs for his team that focused on insider threats as much as external dangers. The experience had taught him that sometimes the enemy was not outside the gates, but within the family itself. It was a sobering lesson that changed how he viewed his entire profession. Camilla had indeed stepped back from public duties. Though the official explanation of health concerns was accepted by the press without much scrutiny, she spent her days in quiet isolation, seeing only a select few friends and advisors. Patricia had distanced herself completely after her conscience had driven her to reveal the truth. That friendship was over, sacrificed on the altar of doing what was right. Camilla understood she had lost more than just public presence. She had lost the respect of people who mattered. Helen, the dismissed staff member, had disappeared from London entirely. The non-disclosure agreement she had signed came with a substantial financial settlement that ensured her silence and her absence. She had moved to a small coastal town where no one knew her history. Sometimes she thought about that day when she had believed she was serving her employer's interests. The weight of what she had done to a child kept her awake many nights. Money could buy silence, but not peace of mind. Derek and his motorcycle. Crew members had scattered after their legal troubles. Some left London, seeking fresh starts where their names were not associated with harassment charges. Derek himself had given up the intimidation business entirely. The incident at the palace had shaken something loose in him. He had seen the face of the girl they had frightened in news photos after the fact. Knowing he had caused a child to have nightmares was not something he could easily live with. He now worked at a motorcycle repair shop, trying to build an honest life. The summer brought the Queen's Garden Party, a major event where family members were expected to attend and present a united front. William and Catherine arrived with their children, including Charlotte, who looked beautiful in a flowered dress. Camilla was also present, having been deemed sufficiently recovered to resume some public duties. It was the first time Charlotte and Camilla had been in the same space since the incident. Charlotte, unaware of any history, smiled politely when introduced. Camilla's expression was carefully neutral, but her hands trembled slightly as she greeted the children. William watched this interaction with ice in his eyes. Catherine placed a protective hand on Charlotte's shoulder, her message clear. They would be civil for the sake of appearances and the institution, but there would never be warmth or trust again. Camilla seemed to understand. After the briefest of exchanges, she moved away to other guests. The family photographs taken that day showed everyone smiling, the picture of unity. But those who knew the truth could see the careful spacing, the lack of genuine connection in the posed arrangements. Richard Thompson observed the garden party from his professional distance. He had positioned his security team strategically, though no threats were expected at such a controlled event. He noticed Camilla's isolation within the family group. She spoke with other guests, but family members kept their interactions minimal. Justice, Richard reflected, sometimes came in forms other than legal punishment. Camilla was paying for her actions through social exile within her own family. Whether that was sufficient was not for him to judge. Charlotte's birthday arrived with sunshine and celebration. The party was held at Kensington Palace with tight security that the children barely noticed. Charlotte had requested a horse riding theme, and the courtyard had been transformed with decorations featuring horses and ribbons in her favorite colors. Friends from school attended, along with carefully vetted family members. Camilla had not been invited. The official explanation was limited space, but everyone who needed to understand the real Reason did so perfectly. William's father had arrived for Charlotte's birthday, bearing gifts and wearing a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. He knew his absence would be noted and interpreted, but attending meant facing the reality of his fractured family. He watched Charlotte opening presents and laughing with her friends. She was innocent and joyful, untouched by the adult conflicts swirling around her. He was grateful for that, at least. Catherine had ensured that children remained protected from the poisonous knowledge of what had really happened. During a quiet moment, William's father approached William and Catherine. He asked if they could speak privately for just a moment. They agreed reluctantly and stepped into a side room. He told them he understood their anger and disappointment. He explained that he had imposed additional restrictions on Camilla that they might not be aware of. She was required to attend regular counseling sessions addressing her behavior. Her access to family information was severely limited. He had made clear to her that any further incidents would result in complete separation, regardless of personal costs. William listened, but his expression remained hard. He thanked his father for the information, but made clear that actions, not words, would determine future relationships. His priority was protecting his children, and anyone who threatened that protection, family or not, would be kept at a distance. Catherine added that Charlotte's well-being was non-negotiable. They had given the institution the quiet resolution it wanted, but family warmth and trust had to be earned back, if it ever could be. The party continued outside, unaware of these tense conversations. Charlotte was riding a pony around the courtyard, her security detail watching carefully, but allowing her the freedom to enjoy her special day. James walked beside the pony, ready to assist if needed, but letting Charlotte have her moment of independence. She was growing up, becoming more confident and self-assured. The incident that could have traumatized her had instead been managed and contained so well that she barely remembered it now. Sarah Chen watched the party from the security office, monitoring camera feeds more from habit than necessity. Everything was peaceful and secure. She thought about the investigation that had consumed her life for weeks, the digital trails she had followed, the evidence she had compiled, all of it now locked away in encrypted files that would likely never see public light. It frustrated her sense of justice that the full truth would remain hidden. But she understood the larger considerations at play. Patricia watched the news, coverage of Charlotte's birthday party from her home. She saw brief footage of the celebration, the smiling family, the happy child. She felt satisfaction that her decision to come forward had contributed to protecting Charlotte. Even if the full justice she had hoped for never materialized, her friendship with Camilla was over, but Patricia could live with that choice. Some friendships were not worth maintaining when they required turning away from cruelty toward a child. As summer turned to autumn, routines solidified into new normals. Charlotte started a new school year with enhanced but discreet security measures in place. She excelled in her classes and made new friends, her natural charm and intelligence winning people over. To her classmates and teachers, she was just a bright girl who happened to be royal. The incident from months ago had faded into the background noise of her busy young life. This was exactly what her parents had hoped for. William and Catherine's relationship, the broader royal family, had found a new equilibrium. They attended necessary functions and maintained public unity, but private gatherings were now carefully considered. They would not expose their children to people or situations that made them uncomfortable, regardless of family expectations or pressure. Some relatives understood and respected this boundary. Others were quietly resentful but had no power to change the situation. Camilla settled into her reduced role, with what appeared to be acceptance. She attended public events when required, but her private life had shrunk considerably. The counseling sessions her husband insisted on had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about jealousy and the lengths she had been willing to go to address perceived slights. Whether she had truly changed or simply learned to hide her feelings better was something only time would reveal. For now, she kept her distance from William's children and made no attempts to rebuild relationships she had destroyed. Richard Thompson implemented permanent changes to how royal security handled information and access. His team had learned valuable lessons about insider threats that would protect future generations of royals. He had written detailed recommendations that were adopted at the highest levels of palace security. The incident, while handled imperfectly in terms of justice, had at least resulted in improved protection protocols that would benefit all royal children going forward. Winter arrived with its cold winds and short days. Charlotte loved the snow and spent hours building snowmen with her brothers in the palace gardens. James and his team watched over them, ever vigilant but trying to let the children just be children. One morning, as snowflakes fell gently around them, Charlotte asked James if bad people ever really got punished for the bad things they did. It was an unexpectedly deep question from a young girl building a snowman. James knelt down to her level, choosing his words carefully. He told her that justice did not always look the way we expected it to. Sometimes bad people faced public punishment, and sometimes the consequences were private but still real. The important thing, he said, was that good people worked hard to protect those who needed protecting. Charlotte seemed satisfied with this answer and returned to her snowman, adding a carrot nose and stick arms. James watched her and silently renewed his commitment to be one of those good people who protected the vulnerable. As the year drew to a close, the royal family gathered for official Christmas photographs. The session was professional and efficient, everyone understanding their roles and performing them adequately. The resulting images showed a united family, smiling and festive. But photographers who worked these sessions regularly noticed the subtle differences. The warmth that had once existed between certain family members was gone, replaced by polite distance. Charlotte, innocent of these undercurrents, smiled genuinely in every photo, happy to be with her immediate family. The story could have ended in scandal and public disaster. Instead, it ended in an uneasy peace maintained by careful boundaries and private consequences. Charlotte grew up protected from the knowledge that someone in her extended family had wished her harm. William and Catherine had sacrificed their sense of justice for their daughter's innocence and well-being. It was a trade they made willingly, but not happily. Years would pass, and Charlotte would become a young woman before she learned the full truth of what had happened when she was young. By then, she would be strong enough to handle the knowledge that family could be complicated and sometimes hurtful. She would understand why her parents had made the choices they made, protecting her childhood at the cost of their own peace of mind, and she would be grateful for the security team, especially James, who had stood as shields between her and those who meant harm. The royal guard had indeed confronted the motorcycle crew, but the real confrontation had been within the family itself, exposing betrayal, demanding accountability, and ultimately choosing protection over punishment. It was not a satisfying ending in traditional terms. There were no dramatic courtroom scenes or public revelations. But Charlotte was safe, her innocence preserved. And those responsible faced consequences, even if they were not the public punishment some believed was deserved. Richard Thompson would retire eventually, his career ending with the knowledge that he had navigated one of the most sensitive security situations in royal history with discretion and effectiveness. He had helped catch those responsible while protecting the institution and, most importantly, the young princess who had been the target. On his last day, he received a personal note from William and Catherine thanking him for his service. It simply said that because of him, their daughter had been able to remain a child a little longer. For Richard, that was reward enough. The motorcycles never returned to Kensington Palace. The lesson had been learned on all sides. Charlotte was protected not just by walls and guards, but by parents willing to make hard choices and a security team that treated threats from within as seriously as threats from outside. The incident faded into classified files and private memories, a story that would be whispered about in security circles but never fully told in public. And in the palace gardens, season after season, a young princess grew up surrounded by love and protection. Unaware of how close danger had come and how many people had worked to keep her safe,